Review time. We have a video here from Elon Gilad. It's been a little while. Let's check this video out. Come on, let's do it.
Jesus never existed. He's just a myth. A comment I see constantly. But here's what historians actually think. The overwhelming majority of scholars, including non-Christian historians, agree Jesus was a real person. Not because of faith, but because of the evidence.
This is so weird. He's defending the existence of Jesus because most of his videos actually criticize and critique Christianity and its claims and its historical claims. And all the evidence, such as the Gospels, he always critiques them as not being credible. So I wonder what evidence he's going to come up with. This is going to be interesting.
First, the Criterion of Embarrassment.
I'm not sure if you want to go there, Elon. Criterion of Embarrassment. Just so you know, I guess in terms of historical criticism, the criterion or the methodology of analyzing historical claims, embarrassing details, the theory behind it is that you wouldn't mention embarrassing details unless they were true. So it goes towards the validity and analyzing the credibility towards historical claims, that if there are embarrassing details there, it must point to the fact that they actually happened. Such as the embarrassing details of like having women go to the tomb and they be the first witnesses to an empty tomb, or the risen Jesus. These are seriously embarrassing details, especially towards first century and second century audiences, because women's testimonies weren't considered credible. Even Celsus, a Greek philosopher and critique of Christianity, uses that as one of the arguments against the resurrection, the fact that women are the one that gave the testimony. You can't trust women. So, I mean, that is an embarrassing detail that you would include unless that actually happened. So I don't think the criterion of embarrassment is going to help Elon's case here. So let's check this out.
If you're inventing a Messiah, you don't make him from Nazareth, a tiny nowhere village that nobody cared about. You'd pick Jerusalem or Bethlehem, or at least somewhere people have heard of.
Okay, so we're going to say that Jesus actually grew up in Nazareth, but we're going to consider that historical, but we're going to ignore the historical claims that he was born in Bethlehem, which is going to act like that didn't happen. That's a little bit embarrassing.
You also wouldn't invent the crucifixion. In the ancient world, crucifixion was the most shameful death possible, reserved for slaves and rebels. If you're creating a divine hero, you don't kill him off like a common criminal. And you definitely wouldn't invent Jesus crying out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" on the cross. That's not how you write a triumphant savior. That's raw human despair.
Wow, he's actually going to go there. So he's going to consider the crucifixion as historical, that points towards Jesus existing. He's even going to say that, my God, why have you forsaken me? That is actually a historical claim. That is true, that Jesus said. And we're just going to ignore the prophetic fulfillment of Psalm 22 in those events where 1,000 years prior, David writes a prophetic psalm about the suffering servant. My hands and feet will be pierced. And, you know, because of the suffering of the servant, God's glory is going to be declared by many nations and many generations to the world. They're going to worship and glorify God because of the suffering of the servant. That actually happened because of Jesus, because of what happened on that cross. You know, even he must consider, in some respects, the sour wine given to Jesus, or the vinegar given to Jesus, as another prophetic fulfillment of Psalm 69. This doesn't help his case at all. This points to Jesus being the Messiah. So that's amazing that he's going to consider those claims to be historical. That's highly intriguing. It does a better case not only proving Jesus' existence, but more so that Jesus is the Messiah.
Then there's Paul's letters, written in just 50s CE, just 20 years after Jesus' death. Paul mentions meeting James, the brother of the Lord, and other people who personally knew Jesus. These aren't legends passed down for centuries. These are first-hand connections.
Wow, this is crazy. So, I mean, he's going to consider Paul's letters and the claims in them as historical, and they were actually written around 53, 54 AD, you know, within about 20-odd years of Jesus, his crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. 1 Corinthians 15, the earliest Christian creed that Paul didn't originate with. He says this is something that we believed, and it talks about the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. This is something that established earlier than 54 AD. That goes back potentially within several years of the actual event transpiring, very close to historical event. This is gold for any sort of history buff here about how close to the event that people started believing in the resurrection of Jesus, that it wasn't a mythology that eventuated later. He even mentions the brother of Jesus. Turns about the criterion of embarrassment. What about the fact that James, the brother of Jesus, didn't believe in him during his ministry? And then after the crucifixion, 40 odd days later, he's in the upper room as a believer. What did he see? He goes on, even Josephus, a Jewish historian, says that he becomes the head of the church in Jerusalem. And he preaches the resurrection of Jesus. He preaches the gospel, and he gets stoned to death. James the Just. You're going to ignore all that? Man, this video is embarrassing. Wow.
The early Christians also had to constantly explain away embarrassing details instead of just editing them out. Why mention that Jesus' own family thought he was crazy? Why include Peter denying Jesus 3 times? If you're making it all up, you don't create these problems for yourself.
You're creating a lot of problems for yourself here. You're making the case for the gospel. You're just picking and choosing what facts you want. This is crazy. Should he see all his other videos, how he criticizes the Gospels, and he's using the criterion of embarrassment. He's embarrassing. You're embarrassing yourself, Elon, massively, by picking and choosing facts, which one that you deem credible, and ignoring all the other ones. Wow.
Here's the thing. Mysticist theories require massive conspiracies and coordinated invention across multiple independent sources. The simpler explanation: there was a real Jewish preacher who got crucified, and his followers built a movement around his memory. Saying Jesus existed doesn't mean accepting any religious claims about him. It just means following the historical evidence where it leads, to a real person whose story got bigger in the telling. Now you know?
This guy's just an entertainer. Shouldn't necessarily be taken seriously. I mean, he's picking and choosing facts. In previous videos, he's said things like this.
So who really wrote the Gospels? Probably educated Greek-speaking Christians living outside Palestine, gathering stories, reshaping theology, and constructing narrative accounts of Jesus for their...
So in one case, the narrative accounts, other case, the historical events. The bottom line is Elon here is just an entertainer. He's some type of writer or columnist. He doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to history. He just disproved his own case in regards to Jesus being the Messiah. He disproved his case about the resurrection. There's so many embarrassing details there that actually point to the fact that the historical claims of the resurrection of Jesus Christ are true. And you don't have to get religious about it. You can just simply follow the historical evidence and take a critical perspective. Hey, Elon, tell me why James, the brother of Jesus, was a skeptic, and then 40 to 50 days later after the crucifixion, he becomes a believer and goes on and preaches the resurrection of Jesus and then dies for that message. You tell me with your historical critical lens why that happened. Stop embarrassing yourself.